In this tutorial, we're going to texture map the shade for this lamp. The body of the lamp was created using the UV texture mapping cylinder from UV. In this one, we're going to use planar mapping to put our desired texture on the surfaces of this four-sided lamp shade. Now, we'll need a couple of different tools here. So what I've done is on my shelf, I've gone in and with Control-Shift, I've gone up to my user interface at the very top and I went to UV and I've chosen UV Editor. And when I click on that, it's going to put in this checkerboard pattern with the green background. And essentially, once we put our texture on, it will be reflected on this menu or this editor, as we'll see shortly. Now, at this point, as we move forward, we really want to have some control over the textures we apply to our surfaces. And again, I want to highlight that these are all polygons. Polygons give us a lot more flexibility in applying our texture maps. Polygons are the dominant geometry form used in the game environment. So that said, let's proceed. So I'm selecting this shape that was constructed from a simple cube in which I've deleted the top and the bottom. And then all I did was with my vertices, I went in and I pinched it at the top to give it something that is pretty much a lampshade. So I'll go back to my object mode. And now I'm going to right-click and I'm going to choose Assign New Material. And my material node comes up. I'm going to choose a Lambert. And I'll immediately name this. This will be Lampshade. And remember that either use underscores or no punctuation at all when typing in Maya. Now I'm not going to add a color, but if I follow that slider bar to its end on the right, there's the checkerboard, and I'm going to click on that. Now I want to apply the default checker pattern that appears in Maya. Now often enough when you go to apply that, you may get an error message down at the bottom. It seems to be a bug in the app. So all I'm going to do now is I'll simply close that out, select my shade once again, right click, go to Material Attribute because I've already applied it, and now I'll be able to proceed. So it's a little bit of a bug sometimes you come across. That's how you would deal with it. So I'm going to apply this texture the way I'd like it to be. And I'm going to need planar mapping. And if I was to take a look at this shape, the sides that are across from each other will have the same planar mapping axes. I'm going to hit W to get my move tool so this is clearer. And you'll see that there's a z-axis, so the texture that would apply on this side as well as the one directly across would also be z. So I'm going to hold down the space bar, I'm going to go to face, and I'm going to shift select both of those faces. I'm now going to hold down my space bar, I'm going to go to UVs over here on the right, fourth bar down, and I'm going to go to the menu for planar mapping. In here, I'm going to change the axis to Z, and I'm going to hit apply. Now with this, you'll notice that there's a texture virtual tool applied to. I'm going to leave that, but the important thing about this is that I want to return to my channels window. So I'm going to click in the upper right-hand corner on that stack of pages, and I want to go down towards this projection width and projection height. I want them to be even numbers. It's up to you the number you want. I'm going to choose the random number of 5. As long as they are both 5, that assures me that my texture map is going to be perfectly square on my surfaces. Now I've got to do the others. So I'm going to select with my Shift key those two. Once again, I'll go to UV, Planar Mapping. And with this one, if I would hit W on the keyboard, the axis I need to select is my red X axis. So I'll change my planar mapping to X. I'll hit apply. I'm done with that, so I'm going to close that menu, that planar mapping out, and once again I'll come over to the projection width and height, and I'll make it the same number of 5. I'm going to go to my object mode, select my geometry, Command S to save, hit continue. Now we're going to go in and we're going to attach all these pieces. And what I mean by that is if I was to go to that texture editor now, and we'll checkerboard, click on that, you'll notice that you see just one iteration of that geometry that we have here. So I'm going to right click on it in my editor and I'm going to choose shell. So what we need to remember here is that a texture UV map is essentially called a shell. So once I've got that, I'll hit W on the keyboard and I'm going to move that out like so. So you're going to notice that if you click on these and you pull them out, there are 4 of these identical surfaces on which to adjust our texture the way we may want. Now, just as a review, that upper right-hand quadrant is where our textures have to reside. These other 3 boxes that we see inside this UV editor are for work only. If I want my texture to appear on my geometry in any capacity, it has to reside in this upper right-hand corner quadrant. So I'm going to zoom back so I see all of these surfaces. Now I'd like to use a continual pattern of some flowers that I'm going to apply to my UV map in Photoshop, and I'd like it to be seamless. So what that means is that I need to glue or tie all these surfaces together as one entity. You'll see what I mean in a moment. But before I do that, I need to address where I see red skins or these red UV maps. Now, how did I get there? Well, if you look inside the UV editor, you'll notice that there is a little horseshoe magnet, and directly to the right, there is a tool with a blue box and then a white box, open box behind it. When I click on and off on that, it fills my geometry in for me. Now, when you first apply this, you may see that checkerboard pattern inside the UV editor as well. And mine happens to be turned off because if I go to my UV editor and I go to this little icon that appears to be a little mountain range, 2 mountains and a little bit of a sun, if I click on and off on that, it hides or shows me that checkerboard pattern. Now, the checkerboard pattern was only so that I could get those squares perfect, like a checkerboard. All right, now I don't really need that, so I'm going to turn that off because it's kind of distracting. The next thing I want to do is I want these 2 red surfaces to be blue, because what this means in Maya is that these faces have been textured backwards. So if I had text on these, there's a good chance the text would be backwards when I finally mapped my texture. So I'm going to shift select both of them, and then I'm going to the left-hand corner of the UV editor to polygons, and about 1/4 of the way down you'll see the word flip. And when you click on that, you'll see they have turned blue now. All right, so now our objective is to put all these together side by side, sewn together as it were, into one UV map. So I'm going to start with the one over here, and I'm going to choose edge. So what we want to do is we want to join these all together on edges. And I'm going to randomly start by selecting this one edge. And you'll notice that when you select a shell inside of Maya, if there are other shells that relate to it, you'll notice that it also selects the corresponding edge to that shell that I initially selected. I want to join those together. So I'm going to go to polygons, and down towards the very bottom, 4th term up, I am going to choose move and sew. And you can see now they've been joined together. Now I'm going to select this one, and you'll see there's the corresponding edge to that shell that will be attached to this one. Again, I go to polygons, move and sew. And I'm going to do the last one. So I'll select this edge. There's its corresponding edge. Now, if you recall, when we use tools in Maya, we can repeat a function consecutively as many times as we want by using the letter G. So I'm going to tap the letter G, and now I've got one complete shell. So when I lay my texture across this in Photoshop, it will be seamless, with the exception of this outside edge, which is something I would have to deal with. Now I want to move that shell into that upper right-hand quadrant and scale it to fit inside. I want this whole texture to show up on my geometry, so it has to fit inside that box. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to choose Shell. Now when I click on any of these surfaces, these shells, you can see they are all one collective shell. I'll place it over that upper right quadrant, hit R to get my scale tool, and now I'm going to scale that to fit inside of that upper right-hand quadrant. I'll hit F on the keyboard to zoom in, and if I wanted to, I could rotate it. It really is kind of insignificant. Each texture you use will dictate how you want to place this inside that, that quarter of the UV editor. I'm going to go and I'm going to export this out as a PSD network, and then I can texture it very easily inside of Photoshop. But before I can do that, I'm going to right-click on the geometry in my viewport, and I'm going to return to object mode, and I'm going to select the geometry. If I didn't do that, I would not have the next option inside the UV editor again to go to Image and then create PSD network. Now, inside the PSD network, I would go up to where it says Image Name, click on the folder to direct it to my project, Maya Lamp. I'll name this Maya Shade Skin 1. And you can see it says Photoshop File. I'm going to hit Save. And then I want to choose the resolution. Now, the default may be 1024 by 1024. That's a good resolution. If I need to do a close-up render of this, perhaps this would be larger so that my texture map would be more detailed in close-up renders. I'm going to leave it at that. All right, so now I'm going to come down to the attributes. And in this case, I want to move the color attribute to the selected attributes. So I click on the word color, and then between these two windows, you'll see your HTML buttons, your left and right. I'm going to click on the one to the right, and it puts my color node over into the selected attributes. Now I'm going to leave this window up. With all my windows, if I was to hit create, it would give me my creation or the function I wanted, but it would close that window out. I prefer, in this case, to click on Apply because it's going to leave the window up, and then you're going to notice that it will go blank and your geometry will be deselected, and that confirms that you were successful in generating that Photoshop texture that we will open in Photoshop. So I'm simply going to hit Apply. My geometry deselected, and my UV editor is empty, which means I was successful.